Margaret Sullivan was 78 years old and had worked as a waitress at the Little Creek Diner for over 15 years. That small roadside restaurant in Virginia was more than just her workplace. It was her refuge, the place where she found purpose after her husband, Harold, left 7 years ago. Every morning she woke at 5 o'clock, made her simple coffee, put on her peach-colored uniform, and drove her old Ford pickup truck to the establishment. Her gray hair was always tied back in a low bun, and her gentle smile won over even the most grumpy customers. That Tuesday in November, the sky was heavy with clouds that threatened a storm. The restaurant was slower than usual. Only a few tables were occupied, mostly by truck drivers who were making their coastal routes and had known Margaret for years. She circulated among the tables with her order book, chatting about the weather, asking about families, remembering everyone's names. It was this attention to detail that made people come back, not just the home-cooked food that Sarah, the cook, prepared with dedication. Around 2 in the afternoon, as the shift was almost over, the door of the establishment burst open. 3 men entered, bringing with them a disturbing energy that immediately changed the atmosphere of the place. The tallest, a man of about 35 with tattoos climbing up his neck and an arrogant expression on his face, led the group. His 2 companions laughed loudly at jokes that only they understood, deliberately pushing chairs aside and speaking in unnecessary volume. Margaret approached the table where they were seated, her notebook ready. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I bring you?" Her voice retained its usual gentleness, that cordiality she had developed over decades dealing with all kinds of people. The tall man looked her up and down with disdain, as if her mere presence were an offense. "You took too long to come and serve us. What kind of shoddy service is this?" Margaret felt the weight of the words, but maintained her smile. "I apologize. What would you like to order?" The orders came accompanied by rude comments about each item on the menu, complaints about the prices, and unpleasant insinuations. Margaret patiently wrote everything down, taking deep breaths, remembering that she had dealt with difficult people before. When she returned to the kitchen, Sarah noticed the tension on her face. "Are those men bothering you?" Margaret simply shook her head. "Nothing I can't handle." Sarah knew that stubbornness, that silent strength that Margaret carried, but she still remained attentive, observing through the service window. The food was prepared quickly, and Margaret brought the balanced plates in her experienced arms. She carefully placed each plate in front of the men, checking if they needed anything else. The group leader picked up his fork, examined the food like a pretentious critic, and without even tasting a bite, violently pushed the plate away. "This is cold. Do you think I'm going to eat this garbage?" Margaret knew the food had just come out of the kitchen, still steaming. "Sir, the food was prepared just a few minutes ago. I can ask them to reheat it if you prefer." The response came in the form of insults. The man rose from his chair, his height intimidating, his voice rising with each word. "Are you calling me a liar, old woman? Do you think that because you work in this miserable place you can disrespect the customers?" The other diners in the restaurant stopped eating, a heavy silence filling the room. Margaret took a step back, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't mean to disrespect you, sir. I'll bring you another dish immediately." But the man wasn't interested in solutions. He was interested in domination, in exerting power over someone he perceived as vulnerable. He continued shouting, his friends laughing and encouraging the aggressive behavior. Margaret tried to maintain her composure, that dignity Harold had, always admired in her, that ability to remain gentle even in the face of cruelty. "I'll speak to the manager, sir. I'm sure we can resolve this." As she began to turn around, the unthinkable happened. The man reached out and grabbed her shoulder tightly, turning her around. "You're not going anywhere until I'm finished talking." Margaret felt the pain of his grip, saw the anger in his eyes, and for the first time in many years, felt genuine fear. She let out a small sound of discomfort, trying to break free from his grip. "Please, you're hurting me." The response was a slap, dry, cruel, echoing through the silent restaurant like thunder. The force of the blow made Margaret stagger to the side, her hand instinctively going to her burning cheek, her eyes filling with tears not only from the physical pain, but from the humiliation, from the absolute injustice of that moment. She had served thousands of people over the years, always with respect and dedication, and now she was there, a 78-year-old woman being assaulted simply for doing her job. The restaurant erupted in indignant voices. 2 truck drivers rose from their tables, ready to intervene. Sarah emerged from the kitchen with a frying pan in her hand, her face red with fury. But before anyone could reach the scene, the front door opened again. The man who entered was about 45 years old, with short gray hair at the temples, an erect posture that revealed years of military discipline, and cold blue eyes that immediately assessed the situation with surgical precision. James Sullivan had just returned from an extended overseas mission. His last communication with his mother had been 3 weeks ago, when he was still in hostile territory carrying out orders he couldn't question. He had planned to surprise her, showing up at the restaurant unannounced, seeing her smile in that way that always brightened his most difficult day. But the scene he found was far from the warm reunion he had imagined. He saw his mother with her hand on her face, tears streaming down her face, a huge man standing over her in a threatening posture. James's training as a Navy SEAL had taught him to assess threats in fractions of a second, to calculate risks, to act with lethal precision when necessary. But in that moment, seeing his mother being assaulted, all that professional coolness was temporarily replaced by something more primal, more visceral. He crossed the distance between the door and the scene in measured, controlled steps, each movement deliberate. His presence was magnetic, commanding attention without a single word being spoken. The aggressor was still laughing with his companions when he felt a firm hand land on his shoulder. He turned angrily, ready to confront someone else, but something in James's expression made the words die in his throat. There was something in those eyes, an intensity that spoke of violence seen and executed, of limits tested in places where civilization was only a distant memory. James didn't need to introduce himself as a soldier. His posture did that for him. "You've just made a very serious mistake." James's voice was low, controlled, more threatening in its calm tone than any shout could be. The aggressor tried to regain his bravado, pushing his chest forward. "And who the hell do you think you are?" But there was a crack in his confidence, a growing realization that he had chosen the wrong target for his abusive behavior. James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he positioned himself between the man and Margaret, creating a physical barrier, his eyes never leaving the aggressor's face. "I'm her son, and you're going to sit in that chair now, apologize properly, and then leave this establishment and never come back." Every word was spoken with absolute clarity, making it clear there was no room for negotiation. The aggressor looked to his friends for support, but both had withdrawn, recognizing that the dynamic had completely changed. One of them even began to stand up discreetly, clearly wanting distance from the situation. The man tried to save face. "I don't need to take orders from anyone. This is a free country." James stepped forward, closing the distance between them even further. His body language was a masterpiece of restrained intimidation. "You're right. It's a free country. Free for my mother to work without being assaulted by cowardly bullies. Free for me to ensure her safety. And free for you to make the smart choice to leave now while you can still walk without assistance." The threat wasn't veiled, but James hadn't touched the man, hadn't technically done anything beyond verbally defending his mother. But there was something in his presence, in the way he moved, that communicated an extreme capacity for violence if necessary. The aggressor swallowed hard, his arrogance evaporating beneath that cold gaze. His friends were already on their feet, moving towards the door, murmuring hurried apologies. After a tense moment where no one in the restaurant could breathe, the man stepped back. He muttered something unintelligible that might have been an apology, grabbed his jacket, and followed his companions out, the door slamming shut behind them. The sound of an engine revving excessively echoed from the parking lot as they fled the situation they had created. Only then did James turn fully to his mother, his hardened expression instantly melting into concern. "Mother." His voice was heavy with emotion as he gently pulled her hand away from her face to examine the reddish mark that was beginning to form. Margaret looked at him through her tears, and for a moment, completely forgot the pain, the humiliation, everything. Her son was there, back home, whole, safe. "James." She whispered his name like an answered prayer, and then collapsed into his arms. All the months of worry, all the sleepless nights wondering where he was, sobbing against his chest. James embraced her, gently, as if she were made of glass, his large hand caressing her back in comforting movements. "I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner. I'm sorry you went through this." Sarah approached with an ice pack wrapped in a clean cloth, her own eyes welling with tears. "Welcome home, James." She had always known who he was, had seen pictures, heard stories, but this was the first time she had met him in person. He accepted the ice with a grateful nod and gently pressed it against Margaret's face. The other, Customers gradually resumed their meals, but not before several of them approached to check on Margaret, offering words of support, expressing outrage at what had happened. One of the truck drivers, a Vietnam veteran with an American flag tattooed on his arm, squeezed James's shoulder. "Thank you for defending her, son. She always knew Margaret had good people looking out for her." James simply nodded, his attention focused on his mother. They sat in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Sarah, bringing fresh coffee and a slice of apple pie, a house specialty that Margaret always said James had loved since childhood. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. James held his mother's hand, his thumb tracing comforting circles over her knuckles, studying each new wrinkle on her face, each strand of silver hair, mentally calculating how much time had passed since they last spent together. "You're thinner," Margaret finally spoke, her voice regaining its firmness. "They're not feeding you properly over there?" It was so characteristic of her, even after being assaulted. Her concern was for his well-being. James smiled, that rare smile he reserved only for her. "I'm fine, Mom. The army food doesn't compare to yours, but I survive. How are you really? And don't tell me you're fine. I just saw what happened." Margaret sighed, looking at her hands. "I've dealt with difficult clients before. Never like this, but it's part of the job sometimes." James shook his head. "It shouldn't be. No one should lay a hand on you. Have you ever thought about stopping? Retiring?" The question had been asked before, in letters, in quick calls whenever he could get a phone. Margaret's answer was always the same. "And what would I do? Stay home watching television waiting for time to pass? This place keeps me alive, James. The people here need me." He understood. After her father's death, the restaurant had become Margaret's anchor, the structure that shaped her days. Harold had been the love of her life, her partner for 52 years. And when cancer took him, a part of her went with him. The work, the daily interactions, the purpose of serving others. It had kept her going when it would have been easier to simply give up. James respected that, even while wishing she could rest, enjoy the years she had left without having to deal with cruel people. Sarah returned to the table, this time with a piece of paper. One of the truck drivers got the license plate number from those idiots. "Car," he said, "we can file a police report if you want." Margaret started shaking her head, but James took the paper. "Thank you. We'll think about it." After Sarah walked away, he looked at his mother. "Mom, he assaulted you. This isn't something we just let slide. Don't you think Dad would want you to defend yourself?" The mention of Harold made Margaret's eyes well up again. "Your father always told me not to go looking for trouble," Jamie retorted gently. "But you didn't go looking for trouble. It came to you. There's a difference." He touched her face again, his expression hardening. "People like that man act that way because they think they can get away with it, because they think kind people like you won't react. But every time we let it go, we give it permission to happen again, to someone else." Margaret knew he was right. All her life, she had avoided conflict, choosing peace over justice when the two clashed. But there was something different about this situation, a line that had been crossed. It wasn't just about her. It was about establishing that violence against anyone, especially against someone simply doing their job, would not be tolerated. "Maybe you're right," she finally said. "What should we do?" James was already thinking several steps ahead, as his training had conditioned him. "First, let's file a police report. We have witnesses, we have the license plate, you have the visible brand. This creates an official record. Second, I'll talk to the owner about improving security here, maybe installing cameras, having better protocols for dealing with aggressive customers." Margaret protested weakly. "I don't want to cause trouble for Mr. Chen." James smiled. "It won't be a problem. It will be protection. For you and for everyone who works here." They spent the next hour talking, truly talking for the first time in months. James recounted what he could about where he'd been, edited stories that removed the real danger, but retained the essence of his experiences. Margaret shared news from the small town, gossip about neighbors, updates on the church she attended, small victories and daily challenges that made up her life. It was comforting, normal, a reminder of why James did what he did, to protect moments exactly like that. When it was time to close the restaurant, James insisted on helping clean up. He put on an apron and began stacking chairs on tables, while Margaret swept and Sarah finished up in the kitchen. It was a domestic scene that contrasted sharply with where he had been just days before, and James found himself appreciating the simplicity, the predictability of mundane tasks. There had been times in combat zones when he had dreamed of exactly this, being at home, helping his mother, doing normal things. The police report was filed the next day. The officer who responded knew Margaret. They had eaten at the Little Creek Diner many times. His expression darkened as he listened to the account, seeing the mark still visible on her face. "We're going to find this guy, Mrs. Sullivan. And when we do, he'll answer for assault. We have enough evidence from the witnesses and the street security camera footage." James had forgotten about that camera, installed by the city the previous year to monitor traffic. Sometimes, fortune favors the righteous. In the days that followed, James remained in town, refusing to leave his mother until he was sure she was well, both physically and emotionally. They fell into a comfortable routine. He would wake up early, prepare breakfast, take her to work, and stay at the restaurant during his shift, sitting in a corner with a book, but always attentive. His presence had a calming effect, not only on Margaret, but on the entire establishment. The customers were universally more polite, more patient. The story of the incident spread through the small community, as stories always do. Some versions were exaggerated, turning James into an action hero who had faced 10 armed men. Others were surprisingly accurate, but all had the same central theme. Someone had defended Margaret Sullivan, and the town rallied in support. Flowers appeared at the restaurant, cards, offers of help. It became clear that Margaret was much more loved than she herself realized. The assailant was quickly identified. Derek Hartman, 36 years old, with a history of domestic violence and assault. It wasn't his first offense, and this time, with video evidence and multiple witnesses, the prosecutor was confident of securing a meaningful conviction. James attended the preliminary hearing, his impeccable uniform a silent reminder that there were consequences for actions, that people were willing to stand up for the vulnerable. Margaret testified with dignity, her voice firm as she recounted the events. She didn't exaggerate, she didn't embellish, she simply told the truth, and the truth was powerful enough. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had seen many cases throughout her career, looked at Hartman with barely disguised contempt as she set high bail and strict release conditions. "Mr. Hartman, assaulting an elderly woman doing her honest work is one of the most cowardly things I've ever seen in this room. I hope to see you again at trial." Months later, when the case finally went to jury trial, the conviction came swiftly. 2 years in prison, followed by extended probation and mandatory anger management classes. It wasn't enough to erase what had happened, but it was justice, a public acknowledgement that what Hartman had done was unacceptable. Margaret watched the verdict being read, James by her side, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph or satisfaction, but relief. Perhaps now she could move on. Time passed, as it always does. James eventually had to return to work, but his visits became more frequent, his phone calls more regular. He had realized something fundamental that day at the restaurant, that his mother wouldn't be around forever, that every moment with her was precious, that protecting her wasn't just about being there during crises, but about being there regularly. Margaret continued working at the Little Creek Diner, but now with security cameras installed, better training for employees on how to handle difficult customers, and an emergency button under the counter that directly alerted the police. The experience changed something in both of them. Margaret learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, that standing up for herself was not only appropriate, but necessary. James learned that heroism doesn't only happen on distant battlefields, but also in small restaurants, in moments of everyday courage, in people like his mother who remain kind, even when the world is cruel. And together, they understood that family is not just about blood ties, but about being there for each other, about standing up for one another, about transforming trauma into strength and injustice into change.